So it looks like the Canadian winter is finally ending. It's warm and sunny outside for the first time in months. So we're gonna do something a little bit different and get out of the house and test out this guy, the Sony FX3 that I just picked up. Just a quick note before we start, this is gonna be a very informal test. I had to order the camera and all the accessories from 2 different places. So the camera came in yesterday, but the Sony lens, the extra batteries, and the fast memory cards haven't arrived yet, meaning I can't test the autofocus, I can't shoot in 4K, and I'm just gonna use this old adapted Sigma 18-35, so I can't test the full frame either. Actually, when I say it like that, it sounds like I'm not really gonna be able to test any of the things that I bought this camera for. But I have a big shoot coming up in Mexico, and so I want to get out of the house and just see what it's like to work outside and how this thing handles and what it feels like in the hands. I always think it's a big mistake to go out on jobs with untested gear. So even if I can't test every little feature on this, I can at least see what the shooting experience is like and figure out what I like and don't like about it before I embarrass myself in front of a whole crew. Today's also going to be a bit of a training session because that upcoming shoot in Mexico is going to be really physical, and even though I can't talk about it too much right now, there's going to be some incredible athletes involved, so I don't want to totally humiliate myself in front of them. So even though I don't have all the accessories that I want, I think it's still a good idea to get the camera out of the office and into the real world. Alright, so we're on the highway, just left Vancouver, and we're heading to Squamish, BC, and we're going to do a pretty well-known hike called the Chief. It's not super hard, but I'm already going to be the least fit person on this crew by a mile. So anything I can do to narrow the gap and not humiliate myself totally is going to be a bonus at this point. Once we get back, and assuming Rich doesn't get eaten by a bear, I'll let you know what I liked about the camera, how it handled, and if there's anything I didn't like. Alright, so we're just at the trailhead about to start, and as you can hear, the mountain's pretty wet, and hopefully this doesn't kick my ass too bad. Alright, so we're about a quarter of the way up right now, I'd say, if that. Finally got the breathing under control, remembered how to hike. Gotta be careful I don't trip on one of these roots and smash this brand new camera. So far, I'm really looking forward to having a lens that can autofocus. This, trying to walk and focus a manual lens at the same time pointed at me on that tiny screen is not fun, I'm sure. Most of these shots are going to be out of focus, but this is all I have, so we'll just give it a go, see what happens. This access to nature is really one of the main reasons why I came back to Canada and moved to BC specifically, so to have this kind of thing in your backyard is pretty amazing, and after 10 years living in huge cities, I definitely don't take it for granted. It's just so clean here. We made it to the top. It took about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Camera went great. I only brought one battery, or I guess I only have one battery. I'm still waiting for the others to come, so got to cut this test pretty short, almost out of power. But so far, no complaints. It'd be nice to see what this footage looks like when I get home and put it on a computer. All right, so we're back in the office, and I am definitely going to be feeling that hike in my legs tomorrow. Overall, I really liked the camera. It handled super well, and I have mostly good things to say about it. But before I get into all those, first let me tell you why I got this camera and why I picked this over the A7S III. There's two reasons I got this camera. The first is for this YouTube channel. I shoot a lot of my docs on an FS7, which is just a little bit too big to be practical for shooting YouTube videos, especially in this tiny office that I work in. The second reason I got the camera is as a B cam for larger shoots, when I've typically got the FS7 built up on a shoulder rig. I can hand this thing off to a director to get a second angle, or I can put it on sticks during an interview, turn on the autofocus, and be pretty sure that I'm going to get a clean cutaway shot without having to monitor it too much. I thought about getting the FX6, but it's just a little too close in size to the FS7 to be really useful. I thought this would be a little more versatile because I could stick it on gimbals, I could mount it to cars, I could use it like a really expensive GoPro if I had to, and it packs up super small, so it's not hard to carry when I travel. The FX6 looks amazing, and in a perfect world, I'd get all three of them, the FX6, FX9, and this guy, the FX3. But right now, I just don't want to be spending that kind of money, and the FX6 and FS7 have too much overlap, so I went with this guy. I know there's been some really mixed reactions to this camera online. A lot of people are saying that it's just an A7S III in a different body, and you should save the 500 bucks or whatever the price difference is. And I get that, but for me, it's worth it. The audio inputs, the ability to attach that XLR handle and have professional audio without having to sync later in post is really important. Also, the built-in fan is great. I know there haven't been a lot of reports of the A7S III overheating, but I shoot outside almost all the time in some pretty crazy environments. So if there's any chance at all that the camera is going to overheat, it's not a reliable work camera for me. I also never use the EVF on mirrorless cameras, so losing it wasn't really a problem. I know that was a big complaint for a lot of people, but for me it's not an issue at all. So first let's get into what I liked about the camera. The first thing I noticed when I pulled it out of the box is that it's a lot heavier than I expected. Sometimes mirrorless cameras are so light that they jitter in your hands and it makes a really unprofessional looking picture. So the extra weight here is actually a real benefit. It also gives me some peace of mind that it's a solid piece of equipment that's not going to break and can stand up to the abuse that I'm definitely going to put it through. The other really great thing for me is the top handle. I know that Sony sells the XLR, KLM, whatever it's called, that's a little bit cheaper than this thing, but having a strong top handle that I can carry the camera by and plug in a lav and a shotgun at the same time is really important for a documentary workflow. If you don't need to run a shotgun and a lav at the same time in your camera, then I can totally see why you don't need this thing, and the A7S III is a much better option. If you're just making images, there's no reason to get this, but for me, in documentaries where sound is almost more important than the picture, I need to have dependable 2-channel audio. The other really pleasant surprise is the menu system. Sony cameras for me have been synonymous with horrible nightmare menus, and even after using my FS7 for years, I still get lost trying to find the most basic settings in there. So having this expanded My Menu system where you can program all the functions that you use most commonly in an easy to find place is a huge improvement. Thank you, Sony. Something else that I love about this camera are the buttons. I love that there are dedicated iris, white balance, ISO, focus magnification. There's custom buttons everywhere. At the same time, the camera ditched most of the features that I didn't use. Things like the exposure compensation dial, the EVF, the mode dial, now accessible by a button, frees up a lot of real estate on this camera for things that are much more important to me. I much prefer having a big record button on the top and on the front and the shutter button than a bunch of photocentric features that I'm never really going to use on a video camera. Now let's get into what I didn't like so much. The main thing that I wish this camera had was the variable ND filter. I know there's some sort of problem with the IBIS system and they can't have both, at least not yet. I'm sure they'll figure it out eventually. But the variable ND built into the camera is one of the main reasons I started using Sony cameras in the first place, and I think one of the reasons why they're so common on documentary shoots in general. Built-in ND filters are incredible, and the system that Sony has on the FX6 and FX9 is amazing. It destroys any screw-on filter that you can buy for your camera, and not having it on here, I realized how much I relied on it. Now on a camera this size, when it comes down to picking between the IBIS and the variable ND filter, I would probably pick the IBIS because small mirrorless cameras like this are prone to jittering. But I really look forward to a time in the future when Sony can figure out this problem and have both IBIS and a variable ND built into this camera. That would really push it over the edge for me. Another thing that I think is a little bit weird about this camera are the mounting points. At first, I was really excited about them. I mean, it means that in theory you don't need a cage. But once I actually got it out of the box and started looking at them, I realized that they're not all that useful. If you don't need the top handle, then you've got a bunch of options for mounting a monitor or something like that. But once you screw that handle in, you're really only left with a couple of really odd quarter 20 threads, one of which blocks the HDMI port, and the other one that is in the same place where your hand would sit right here. So I'm not sure I'm actually going to use those. That said, I don't really know where they should have put them instead, and some mounting points is definitely better than no mounting points. Like for example, when I'm shooting an interview and the camera is locked off on a tripod, it's no problem for the monitor to be sticking out of the side at a weird angle. But when I'm sort of running and gunning and I have the top handle installed, I don't really think I'll be mounting any extra accessories to this thing. The other thing I kind of wish they'd done is put 2 tripod screws in the bottom. One is fine and I'm sure it'll be okay, but most of my professional tripods, like my Sackler Flowtech, the plates all have 2 screws, and it would have been nice to really lock this thing down so you could be sure it wasn't going to spin around on you. The last thing I don't love about this camera is the price. I know we're really lucky these days to have, affordable cinema cameras, but it's still really expensive for what it is. I probably couldn't use this as an A camera on a documentary shoot, and so to spend that kind of money on a B cam kind of stings. Now, I know that these cameras can't be free, but if I could have anything I wanted, and if the Sony gods were listening to me right now, I'd ask them to make it cheaper. So to wrap it up, I really like this thing, and I'm very glad I bought it. There's some things that I'd like to see done differently in the future, and I could, find a ton of tiny things to complain about. But overall, it's an amazing B camera for me, and it's going to open up a bunch of options for things like car mounts and gimbal work that were off limits with my FS7. The alternative is the A7S III, which for anybody not shooting audio heavy content, if you're only focused on the image itself, I'd say get that. But for me, shooting mainly documentaries where I need to have characters mic'd all the time, the really sturdy XLR handle is a huge win. And as a YouTube camera, this thing's obviously amazing. 422, 10-bit color, 4K, it's a great camera. It's probably a little bit overkill for these videos, but I can justify it because I can put it to work on some of my other shoots as well. Sometime in the next week or so, the Sony lens and the extra batteries and the fast memory cards are going to be in, and then I can really shoot this thing to its full potential. I'm going to take it to Mexico with me next month, so if I'm not too tired at the end of the day, and if I have enough free time to actually do a bit of vlogging, I'll try and do a more detailed review from the field. If not, it'll just have to wait till I get back here. All in all, really happy with this thing. I like the build quality. I like the form factor. I like that it feels durable and tough, and I'm glad I bought it. Can't wait to actually put it through its paces in Mexico next month. And keep your eyes open for a full packing list to see what I take with me on an expedition. See ya.